Hi there, John Romer here. I thought I would do a quick illustration from a project yesterday. I was filming a one-camera interview. Camera obviously on the subject, interviewer would not be seen or heard in the final piece. But in addition to my client being there, we had a group of observers, sort of from the client but not directly my client. They are considering doing a video series in the future, wanted to see how I work, wanted to see the level of production involved, and really just sort of get a sense of how this is done. But additionally, based on questions they were asking me, I could tell what was going through their minds is what goes through the minds probably of any potential client in 2017. Do we hire someone? Do we go outside? How much of a production do we want this to be? Can we shoot it inside? Can we just shoot it on an iPhone? How important is the project to us? Is it something that we're just throwing on social media quickly? Does it have a longer life than that? All those kinds of questions that are bounced around. And from the filmmaker, the videographer's perspective, it may seem a silly question like, why light? Why not just shoot it with an iPhone? Why add a light? That kind of thing. But from the client's perspective, again, in 2017, that's a question that comes up, whether or not we like to hear it. So I just thought I would dive into this a bit. What we're seeing here is a still image shot with an iPhone of a moot courtroom. That's a room at a law school that's essentially set up like a courtroom for students to practice and have moot court competitions and that sort of thing, be the prosecution, be the defense, be the judge, be the jury, all those sorts of roles. So we're filming an interview in this space. We're using the room as the background. The interviews can be rather long. The subject needs to be seated. So those are kind of the constraints that we're working within. In looking at this room, there's not a ton of space. Our open space is sort of in this area here, and that's it. So initially I thought I would actually film with the camera over here and then have it kind of looking on a slight angle over here, and maybe our subject would be seated in this area over here. But in the end I opted not to do that. I at first was attracted to this nice wall in the back and the rows, but the frame looked too flat to me. There was too much potential actually for the tops of these walls to be falling too close to the subject's head, or the subject having to be so close to them they wouldn't fall out of focus enough. I obviously would have moved the chairs probably out all the way if we had shot that way, but in the end opted not to do that. And what I did instead to create a shot that had more depth was have our subject, pardon my drawing, in this area here, seated on a stool, cameras over here. Yeah, that's a tripod. And our interviewer would be slightly camera right, our subject would be slightly camera left, so that they would be looking just across the frame a little bit. And that's kind of the setup I was going for. And since I knew I had a potential client there who was wondering, is this worth it, that kind of thing, I decided to do, in essence, a before and after. What would this look like if it wasn't lit? What would it look like if it was lit, which is what we ended up doing. So in terms of the frame, this is literally the frame of what the camera saw. My assistant Chris is graciously sitting in for us. And the idea here in the frame is this is our wide shot. We're about 44 millimeters on an 18 to 80 zoom lens on Super 35. And we shot in 4K with the idea that we could punch in post to both mimic having a second camera, but also to allow for edit points. And when that's punched in, odds are, something like this is absolutely fine, and since you're 4K in a 1080 timeline, you can punch in, enlarge that 25% of the frame and not lose any quality. But you can see this is it. So certainly would be doable. Subject would end up having, raccoon eyes, lots of shadows around their eyes, that kind of thing. And while it would certainly work, it isn't the nicest, most pleasing shot in the world. So what I started to do with our subject there in the camera set is building this with our key and fill, a backlight, and then deciding, what else do we need to do, what else should be done in the room. Looking at the room again, there's a mix of lighting. Color temps were all on the very warm side, but some spaces there were fluorescents kind of built into things that was making those areas go a bit green, not tremendously so, but about 10 points. And in the end, what I decided to do was to turn off almost all the lights, except for a couple of the cans that are up in the ceiling on either side. And since those are warm, I set all my lights to be tungsten. I have 4 1x1 light panel Astras that are bicolor, so they can be anything from tungsten to daylight. And then I have a couple Fresnel lights that can be filtered to be tungsten. They're normally daylight. So if we go back to our frame, thinking this through, our subject's looking slightly camera right. I want to add, I like to add my key on this side so they're kind of looking towards the light. If need be, I'll add a little fill. We'll think about a little just side light, backlight to kind of separate them a bit. And then again, we'll look at the background. So what I ended up doing was actually using all the lights I had with me, which was 6 lights. Do you have to use 6 lights? No, of course not. At minimum, you know, maybe 1 or 2 would separate your subject, but then you wouldn't have any control over the background. So what do we have? We've got our stool, we've got our camera. Our interviewer is going to end up being in this area, again, just the camera right. And what we're going to do for our key is this Astra over here, which is pushing through a RoadRags, which is 24 by 36 diffuser to soften the light, make a nice soft key. And then our fill, I have another Astra over here on the left that's in a Softbox, and that's got a grid on it to keep our light a little tighter on our subject. So it's softened, but it's thrown further and a little tighter because of the grid on the Softbox. So that kind of sets that up. Boom, that's great. First thing we noticed in this type of setup, we were having a lot of spill in the background. This area sort of behind this was getting a shadow. So I'm going to get rid of those marks. We added another RoadRags 24 by 36. This is a black flag to just gobo that and stop that from spilling there, and that took care of that, and that was great. Next up, wanted to add a little backlight to the subject. So that's this Fresnel back here. That's a light panel Sola 4, a 4-inch Fresnel light. Didn't have to be very bright. Did put a full CTO on it, again, because it's a daylight light. And then also added a little diffuser to that. So that's going to hit our subject on the sort of back and side. And that looked great. Looking at the frame, what else was needed? The wall area sort of in the back here, this desk. So the sort of this wall area needed a bit of light. So I had another 1x1 light panel Astra. I tried turning it the opposite direction, and probably about 10 feet over from here, from the right side of the frame, is a white wall. And I tried bouncing off of that. The bounce was nice, but it wasn't strong enough. So what I did for this light in the back was similar to what we had up here for our key. I added a RoadRags diffuser, and that was great. And that gave me a soft light that was going to hit the desktop, hit the wall, hit the chairs a bit. What ended up happening, these walls, this is a new room, you know, can be somewhat reflective, and on the right side of the camera frame, sort of in this area, it was getting a little bright. So I took a grid cloth that's also part of that RoadRags kit, and that diffuser that's over here, I just basically C47, aka clothespin, this kind of grid cloth to the scrim cloth, to half of that to tone down the light on the side. That looked good. Looking at the frame then too, you know, if we go back to the unlit one, so our key is going to hit Chris over here. Boom, our fill's going to hit Chris over here. Our backlight's going to do here. And then we just discussed the light that's hitting here and hitting the desktop. All good. This desk that's being seen in the right was looking just a little darker, a little boring. So what I did was take another Sola 4, that 4-inch Fresnel, same as doing the backlight, and with a fairly tight, low diffuse beam, full CTO, which is full cut orange to make it tungsten, plus a diffuser, aimed it to kind of rake across this desk over here to give us a little light and a little interest there. All looking good, and the only thing left at this point was our white wall in the back. And while it would have been fine as is, a little bit of light on there just would add a little dimension, a little interest. And again, going back to the front, so we've added our light here, and now we're talking about this area that's behind Chris, the white wall. What to do with that. So I had one more Litepanels Astra, and I didn't put a softbox, but I have a hard grid for it, and that the Litepanels makes a great little frame, so you can slip that right on, and that is actually raking across here and kind of hitting like that to just add some light in the wall, and that's good. And what we ended up with was something that looks more like this. So you've got our key on Chris, our fill, this sort of backlight, side light. We've got the background light here, and that's also hitting the desktop. We have the little 4-inch flanelle over here, and then we have our Litepanel Astra hitting the white wall. And again, it's fairly subtle, but it's kind of this area here. And what's great is this is helping us to separate the darker side of Chris, as is the backlight. And even our spill from the Astra that's all the way in the back on the right to hit the desk in the top here is making a nice kind of beam of light, shaft of light back there, and that's helping to separate our subject too. And I'm just going to go back to a clean version, and that's really what we have. So, you know, why light? The difference between not lighting is that, and lighting is that. And, you know, our subject is more front and center, even though they're in the same spot. Our background's a little more interesting, and, you know, this could be further pushed in post in terms of contrast or adding a vignette or that kind of thing. We can pop over to Final Cut, and here's a little video of Chris with no lighting, and then we've got Chris with the lighting, and again we're kind of looking between those two frames, and I've got right here just a side by side to give a sense. So he's definitely popping out from the frame more. In the frame, that's where the viewer's attention is going to go. We can punch it in post and all that kind of fun stuff. It is possible, and I played around with this, with the version of Chris that was shot with no lighting, just the room light, that could be played up in post a bit. And if you do play it up, you can do this. I've highlighted his face, I've added contrast and saturation to different areas, but I'm starting to push things a lot to do that, and that's also giving me a little bit of noise in some of my shadow areas. But just for a point of comparison, that's where you end up versus here. It helps, but it's still not as good as actually lighting them direct. One thing, I'll go back to Photoshop for this, for still images. You know, in the shot of Chris, I'm not crazy about the shadows that are here. Now, our subject had a much wider collar, so we didn't end up with that as an issue. But obviously, in setting that up, if one wanted to get rid of that, you would need a bigger, softer source, maybe the light going through a 4x4, similar with the fill. But that would be how you take care of that. To recap, this is what we started with. This was actually the camera's view without any lighting, just with the room lighting. And then this is what we added, a total of 6 lights, and this is what we ended up with. That's it. Thanks for watching.